Okay, so let's move on to the carriage and fit the two electromagnets that fit onto the carriage that then lock in place to stop the machine moving front to back or stop the carriage moving from side to side. So these are the two electromagnetic units. And what we've got is one here that fits at the front of the carriage, and I'll show you how that works in a moment. But the way the whole system works is that when the electromagnet is applied, this magnet that's in this housing locks onto the steel plates that we're going to install at the front of the frame. And once it's locked in place, this carriage cannot move from side to side. So the machine could only move forwards and backwards so that you can do lines, sort of vertical lines on your quilt. The other electromagnet fits to the side of the carriage here, and this one moves upwards to fix onto that plate that we've just fitted onto the bottom of the machine. And when the electromagnet locks onto the machine therefore can't move forwards and backwards, and it can only move from side to side. So by activating that one, you can do straight lines from left to right on your quilt. So the first one we're going to fit is what's called the X-axis magnet, which goes onto the front of the carriage here. So I'm standing at the back of the carriage. Here's the rear encoder cable that I have taken out from the Amara machine. I'm at the back of the carriage. This is fitted onto the front. So this is the X-axis electromagnet, and you'll have a key. It won't be a green one, but an Allen key in your kit. That's a 2.5mm Allen key, which is used to loosen and tighten these two bolts here. They are holding in place these two connectors here, which fit onto the carriage itself. So standing at the back of the carriage, this cable goes to the left-hand side, and I put this in diagonally with the cable underneath the carriage, and I lift that so that it goes on top of the carriage rail here, and the same thing on this side onto the right-hand side of the carriage. I can then push that right to the front of the carriage. It needs to be butted up completely against that here, and now I can tighten those two bolts up with the Allen key. Do the second one on this side. There we go, that's the X-axis electromagnet fitted to the carriage. Right up against here, the cable on the left-hand side, which goes underneath the carriage here. So the next thing is to fit this electromagnet. And the first thing we do is to mark halfway along the length of this carriage. So depending on your machine, that will be a different length carriage. Measure that, and halfway I've put a very small pencil mark here so that I can see where the centre of that carriage is. We'll need that in a moment, but for now I'm going to turn this carriage over. So this has a couple of connectors on it. This is how it comes from the box. It's got the same type of connectors here as we had on the top electromagnets. This needs to be loosened. Loosen this one as well. We don't want to be touching this circuit board here. You don't want any static electricity to make a mess of your electromagnet as soon as you've got it. So I'm loosening those two without them coming out. And we've got 3 connections to make here. This is already in place. And the second one that goes on here is the loose wire connector that's coming from this electromagnet. On the other end of this, we've got 2 more connections which I'll talk you through in a moment. So what I'm going to do is to fit this cable connector into here. So this is the one coming from the electromagnet on the front of the carriage, and it's going to go with a little clip on the upper side and just fits into place on here and clicks into place. Both those cables then fit into this slot here, and they'll be tucked nicely out of the way. To hold them in place, you'll have some small clips here. Just put one of those cable clips around and tighten it up and snip off the excess. That will just hold those two in place nicely. Now with that one in place, we need to turn this back again. And this is where my pencil mark is going to come in. So I'm making sure that that is nicely tucked into that slot here so that it doesn't get in the way. And on this electromagnet we have an arrow, and the arrow is going to be pointing to that pencil mark that I've made halfway along the carriage, because that shows us the position it needs to be in. So this is the top of the carriage, and I'm now going to just fit this into place. These two clips fit onto the top ledge here of the carriage on the left hand side when you're looking from the back, and I'm going to tighten that up such that the arrow is pointing to my center marker on the carriage. Tighten that up so that that isn't going to move anywhere. And now that's both of my electromagnets fitted. The only thing that remains to be done is the power supply to make it operate, and a bit of cable management. Here you'll see the cables could drag along the surface of your table, so you'll have some other connectors in the box, and I would recommend you just tying those up with another of those connectors so that it's not going to drag along the surface of the table. So the next thing we need to do are the two power connectors. I'm going to turn this over again. And on this side of the electromagnet, we've got these two connectors. We've got two cables that come in the box. This one, which has got a male and a female end here. We need the male end that plugs into this power supply here. It's a pin on this end. And the second cable has a clip, and this goes in here on the other side. That clips into there. Put those cables into the middle of the carriage, turn it back over, and we're also supplied with a clip that helps us manage those cables. So those cables will now come up over the top of the carriage, and this unit will slide over those cables and hold them in place. In a moment, we will tie those connectors to manage the cables in place. But this just now slips under here, and we're supplied with a bolt, which I've lost, a bolt and a washer here, and a 4mm hex key. There's a pre-drilled hole in your carriage. That goes into here and gets tightened up, and then all the cabling is in place.